So before we really get into the nitty-gritty of the application and the interviews, what I want to do is take time and really focus on driving in the mindset and the strategy you should be utilizing throughout your recruiting process. So one of the first things that I've hammered in multiple times throughout this series is that product management recruiting is incredibly competitive. There's very limited spots. It's a small window to apply for applications. There are an insane amount of highly qualified candidates, and the recruiting cycle is incredibly dragged out. So that's why going in, it's incredibly important that we can have that right mindset and the right strategy to put ourselves in the best situation possible. So for our application strategy, we're going to have two parts. The first one is going to be the shotgun approach. And what I mean by that is I want you to apply to every single PM program, regardless of if you think you're too good for it or you just wouldn't want to work at that company. You're going to apply to every single one, because what we're going to do is every time you apply is you're going to be able to learn from each experience. So it's really important that you apply to every single one. But the other half of our approach is going to be the sniper approach. And what I mean by that is you're only going to actually prepare for a handful of companies. So it's going to be a waste of time trying to get the perfect why this company for every single application and to know the products of every company. So with the sniper, we're going to be incredibly well prepared for a handful of companies. That way we can do exceedingly well at our top choices. So going a little bit more in depth for the shotgun approach, essentially what our goal is to get you a job in product management. Once you become a product manager, it's pretty easy to switch around companies because there is ultimately more demand for great product managers than there is supply. The issue is that companies want reputable product managers who have a track record of launching products. That's why it is so crucial that we just get you a product manager job at any company, because that first role is going to be the hardest to get. So, like I said before, you're going to apply to every single company. I've attached a list of all of the APM programs that I know of, but I highly suggest you go and look for more. There's more coming up all the time as APM positions are growing in popularity among companies. So definitely do your own research as well. And then what I want you to do is, once you have that list of all the programs you're applying to, is I want you to rank your choices into your first choice, your second choice, and your third choice. And that's going to help us know which ones we really want to go for, which ones we kind of, and which ones are really like our fallbacks. And that's going to be the third choice. And all of this that I want you to track is in your interview prep dashboard. And then the other side, the sniper approach, that's just going to be, we want to kill your top choices. You really should have probably anywhere to 3 to 5 top choices. And for killing those, what I want you to do is I want you to have a perfect why this company. So have a great why Facebook, a why Google, and then know all of their products inside and out. So if your top choice is Facebook, know about Facebook birthdays, reactions, events, all of Facebook's products. And I want you to really put time and effort into being prepared for these top 5. With our second choices, we can put a little bit more effort in, and then our backups, they're going to be more preparing as they come up, like the day before or honestly the day of, because it's going to help you stand out so much, and it's just unrealistic to be as prepared for your top choices as your backups. It's a waste of time. For example, for me, I don't really game at all. So Zynga was on one of my bottom of my list. That would have been like one of my absolute last choices, and I don't know if I might have even taken a different company over PM position at Zynga. But if you want to work there, no problem. But anyway, I would rather spend more time preparing for my Microsoft interview and having all of my answers down and taking the time to read Satya Nadella's book to really do well in my interview versus doing okay in the Microsoft and okay in Zynga. Rather be amazing Microsoft, not that great at Zynga. So that's really the sniper approach. And what the dashboard is going to be super helpful here is just because the interview process for all these companies is so dragged out and takes months, and you can have such long waiting times that it's going to be really helpful for you to track where you are with each company and where you are for each date. So that's why I want you to do that in the dashboard. So the second strategy or shotgun and sniper kind of together. But anyway, the second strategy really is I want you to interview for one of the reasons we're going to apply to every company is because I want you to interview for the companies that you care about the least first. And like kind of to explain that and break that down. When I was going through the process, Oath was the first company that opened their applications and set up interviews. And I intentionally made sure that all my Oath first round and second round were always before my Facebook interviews. And the reason I was doing that was because essentially interviewing is really hard. And interviewing live versus doing a mock is very hard. And you also need to develop that skill. So we're essentially going to use the companies we care about the least for practice. I'm not saying don't try. You should definitely 100% try your best. But you'll be able to, if you mess up and you learn from your mistakes, you're going to be learning on the companies that you care about the least. One of the things to keep in mind, though, is don't push off one of your top choices for 2 or 3 weeks to interview with another company beforehand, but just keep this strategy in mind and don't overlook it. The companies that you don't care about the most, schedule them earlier. That way you can practice with those companies. That way you're even more prepared when it comes to the companies that you really want. Okay, so now let's go to our interview strategy. And essentially, there's going to be 3 main interviews with every company. You're going to have a product interview, you're going to have a behavior interview, and then you'll have either kind of just a third one, which will either be a technical interview, a strategy, or Facebook has execution. So just kind of a third one that could be any category. But what we want to do is, after I've done so many mock interviews and all of my friends have, and I've kind of talked to all of them, what we found is that it's hardest to stand out in product interviews. And the reason is because you're either terrible at product interviews, you're okay, you're good, but getting kind of from good to phenomenal, it's very difficult because you have to be super creative with your product ideas, you have to think through everything, and that's what a lot of people struggle with because a lot of people are really good at them, but to be in that top 1% is quite difficult. But what we found was that standing out in behavioral interviews is significantly easier. If you have an experience that is really meaningful to product management, like you started a business, launched a product, it's going to be easier to talk about that and to get along with your interviewer. So what I want you to do now is I don't want you to overlook the behavioral interview. And that's really what the key to this strategy is we want to focus on doubling down on our strengths and just make our weaknesses acceptable. So for me, to put that in perspective, what I did is I don't have the strongest technical background. So of the 3 interviews, product, behavioral, and technical, I really just focused on making my technical acceptable. I knew there was no way I'd ever stand out in a technical interview, and that's the one I would probably get rejected for. So I made that was acceptable. That's where I got my skill level because I knew going from acceptable to great would have been a huge hurdle for me. But what I did, and then I got really good at product interviews, and then my kind of specialty was my behavioral. So that's where I really doubled down and I had all my stories memorized. I looked up my interviewers ahead of time to research them so I could connect with them in my interviewer. And I put all of my focus in my behavioral interview. So in conclusion, for our interview strategy, do not overlook the behavioral interview and then double down on your strengths. Make your strengths really good. That way you can crush at least one of those 3 interviews and stand out. And then your weaknesses, just really focus on making them acceptable. To wrap up this section, what I want to do is really talk about mindset. So, at least for me, going through this process was incredibly stressful and there was a ton of anxiety. The day, probably one of the worst days of the summer before recruiting, was my friend told me the odds of Facebook's RPM program, and I was just devastated. I was like, that's nuts. There's no way I'm going to get an on-site. I don't have a computer science background. What if they ask me a technical question? And there's all these thoughts that I was just like, what if they ask this question? What if they ask this? What if I don't know it? And there's just a ton of anxiety. But what you have to realize is that none of that matters. You just need to act like you're going to get an offer from every single PM program. And you just need to be exceedingly confident. If you listen to my resume tips, you get a referral, you have the skills qualified for a job, and you prepare heavily for all your interviews, you're going to do great. I promise you. You're going to have a really solid chance. But if you lackadaisically try to go through this process, you're not going to get an offer. Every single person that I know that ended up with a PM role had grinded, put their head down, and really focused. And I don't want you to get down if you have one hiccup. For example, if you apply to Google and get rejected right off the bat, that's Google. That's not Microsoft. That's not Intuit. That's not Facebook. That's not any of the other programs. That's just one program. And that means you just need to put your head down and start working really hard. And you need to figure out why that happened and just keep going forward. And the one thing that I really want you to take away from this is one of the sayings that is probably one of my biggest life's advice is you can't change what's already happened, so just focus on what's next. If you get rejected, forget it. Just keep going. You got to focus on your other applications. And that's really the mindset I want you to have going through this process. I want your head to be an iron box where just nothing penetrates it. Like you're confident, you know you're going to get an offer, and you're going through that the entire way. I had a friend that didn't even get an interview with Microsoft. He got rejected from Google after the first round, and he got Uber's APM program, which tons of people want, and it still worked out for him. So just because you have one hiccup or one bump in the road doesn't mean it can't turn out great. Just got to keep your head down and just keep focused on going forward. And I know that you're going to kill it.